As of late 2017, the situation in Somalia is grim but not without hope. The internationally recognized federal government is located in Mogadishu and underwent a peaceful change of leadership in May, a development widely hailed as a significant step forward in the reconstruction of the country. The government is, however, still entangled in a difficult fight against al-Shabaab, the al-Qaeda-linked insurgent group. Aiding the federal government's national army is the African Union Mission in Somalia, commonly referred to as AMISOM, which consists of some 22,000 troops contributed from Uganda, Burundi, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Djibouti. The conflict between these forces has been going on for a decade, and al-Shabaab has been pushed back from much of the territory it controlled at its peak. While it's hard to draw specific battle lines, al-Shabaab's presence is strongest in the south, which is subsequently the least stable and most violent region in the country. Generally, beating back al-Shabaab has consisted of two main steps. First, the areas that it controls must be liberated, which is important because al-Shabaab can levy taxes, called zakat, in places where it is the de facto government, providing a crucial source of funding for the group. Second, these swaths of land must be defended and stabilized to restrict al-Shabaab's freedom of movement and prevent recruitment or extortion of the local population. Unless territorial advances are solidified, the insurgents can move troops and supplies freely through these areas or launch attacks there, making a military end to the war impossible. In order to take a closer look at the security situation in Somalia, we're going to spend the first part of this video looking at each of the three main actors. First up is AMISOM, the African Union-backed peacekeeping force, which is the best supplied and single largest army in the country. A quick introduction to what AMISOM is and how it is funded. AMISOM is the African Union's largest peacekeeping operation, and, as mentioned above, consists of troops from many African Union member states, especially those in East Africa. The countries whose soldiers fight in the conflict are called Troop Contributing Countries, TCCs, and they are largely expected to use their own weapons and vehicles, being reimbursed for the costs later on from several international funds. This structure has caused some problems. The technology available to the troop contributing countries is not as advanced as the countries that are funding them, take the United States for example, and some areas like combat helicopters are severely lacking as a result. Also, the amount of money in the international funds fluctuates greatly, creating uncertainty about the future scale of the operation. And the situation on the ground is not much better. When AMISOM began in 2007, it was intended only to reclaim the capital Mogadishu from the Islamic Courts Union, who we'll talk more about in the next video. Anyways, AMISOM won, and over the next 10 years it has retaken most of southern Somalia, including the coastal cities that provided much of al-Shabaab's financing. Because of this expansion, AMISOM essentially became a stabilization force, tasked with securing massive swaths of land while possessing only half the troops that experts say might be needed. Unsurprisingly, this has been problematic for many reasons. On a military level, AMISOM is forced to rely on long supply lines, which make easy targets for al-Shabaab and require a significant amount of troops to protect. For instance, in July of this year, there was a notable attack where al-Shabaab ambushed a joint convoy of AMISOM and Somali national troops as they escorted supplies, killing 12 Ugandan soldiers. The stabilization role has caused problems on a social level as well, because many Somalis see AMISOM's presence as an invasion of foreign troops, a way for regional interests to take advantage of the chaos in their country. And this perspective has some merit. AMISOM is organized so that different troop contributing countries are in charge of different areas, and neighboring Kenya and Ethiopia were given regions along their own borders. This can create conflicts of interest where troops are chiefly concerned with preventing al-Shabaab from reaching their own country and not stabilizing Somalia as a whole. Moreover, AMISOM soldiers often take orders from their leaders at home instead of AMISOM's headquarters. Also, Kenya and Ethiopia have previously launched their own unilateral missions into Somalia, the soldiers from which were incorporated into AMISOM or continued to operate alongside it. In some cases, the abuse has been fairly brazen. Peter Albrecht, a senior researcher at the Danish Institute for International Studies, points to an incident on the border with Kenya. Quote, Kenya is driven by strategic and economic interests in maintaining control of the southern port of Kismayo. In early 2014, it was announced that most of Kenya's troops were to leave Kismayo and be replaced by Sierra Leonean troops. This decision was motivated by the Somali government's criticism of the Kenyan Defense Force working on a domestic agenda. By 2015, Kenyan troops remained in charge of Kismayo, and Sierra Leonean troops left AMISOM due to the Ebola crisis in West Africa, which prevented the Sierra Leonean battalion of 850 personnel from being replaced. Neither the federal government of Somalia nor the African Union was able to enforce the replacement of the Kenyan Defense Force. Finally, in case you aren't convinced yet, here's a bonus round of a few more reasons why AMISOM might look self-interested. First, Ethiopia has long been seen as Somalia's regional rival, and the two have had a contentious history with multiple conflicts. Second, after AMISOM liberates areas, it is often forced to put one of the many local clans in power in order to create some form of stable governance, which creates the impression that AMISOM countries are trying to destabilize Somalia and inflame internal divisions. Third, many Somalis believe widely circulated stories of human rights abuses by AMISOM soldiers, which have often caused national outrage. Understandably, all of this makes it hard for Somalis to see AMISOM as benevolent, rather than a self-interested collection of foreigners trying to take advantage of the chaos. It might sound like good news then that AMISOM is supposed to end in the next few years, leaving the Somali National Army to take over the fight against al-Shabaab. Unfortunately, it is hard to believe that the Somali National Army will fare better on their own than with AMISOM's support. The Somali National Army consists of about 10,000 troops, half the size of the already overstretched AMISOM force. This shortage is compounded by the fact that the Somali National Army lacks many essential components of a functioning military. As Paul D. Williams, an associate professor of international affairs at George Washington University, put it, the Somali National Army lacks, quote, mobility, especially armored vehicles, all types of ammunition, heavy weapons, communications equipment, field defenses, as well as specialist vehicles such as ambulances and water trucks. The Somali National Army also suffered major shortages and problems related to training, logistics capacity, vehicle maintenance facilities, arms and ammunition storage facilities, medical support, medical facilities and ambulances, and barracks for its troops. All of these problems are accentuated by the fact that the command structure of the Somali National Army is plagued by corruption. It is not uncommon for soldiers' salaries to be embezzled, which causes periods where government troops cease fighting and set up extortion checkpoints to replace their income, creating lulls where al-Shabaab can regain territory. Furthermore, the government cannot keep track of its own soldiers, leading to high rates of absenteeism, moonlighting, defections, and ghost soldiers. In fact, a study based in the capital Mogadishu found that 50% of all security sector personnel worked in the private sector in some capacity, far from what you'd expect of a professional army. In fact, the idea that the Somali National Army can even be considered a coherent fighting force dissolves quickly. As Ken Menkhaus, professor and chair of political science at Davidson College, puts it, quote, most of the 6 brigades of the Somali National Army are closely identified with a single clan, which can become deeply problematic when deployed to areas where that clan has claims or aspirations to control valuable land. In 2013, an almost full-blown war exploded in the lower Shabelle region between locals, some of whom were members of the local police force, and the 3rd Brigade. What appeared superficially to be an inexplicable battle within the Somali security sector was, in fact, a thinly disguised clan war over authority in the lower Shabelle region. Al-Shabaab is easily exploiting these abuses, recruiting from among communities fighting the clan-based federal government of Somalia brigades. While these problems threaten success in the war against Al-Shabaab, the Somali National Army won't be completely on its own. As mentioned in the last video, the United States has been active in launching targeted strikes towards Al-Shabaab's leadership, killing its founder, many officials, and the head of its intelligence wing twice. By all accounts, this has somewhat degraded the capacity and cohesion of the group, although the true impact is impossible to estimate. All of this brings us to al-Shabaab. Despite loss of territory and leadership, al-Shabaab resurged in late 2016, following the withdrawal of an independent Ethiopian force. The group has also launched several sophisticated terrorist attacks in the capital, including the massive bombing that killed hundreds in October, as well as devastating assaults on military bases throughout the country. These attacks are possible because al-Shabaab has retained much of its strength through territorial losses, retreating quickly from battles and enjoying light casualties. Its fleet of technicals, a regional term for improvised fighting vehicles, has been especially resilient, and have been used to enable attacks on hard targets like military bases. Another important tool is al-Shabaab's intelligence wing, which is responsible for rooting out dissidents, planting sleeper cells in controlled areas, and coordinating sophisticated attacks on civilian targets, like the massive bombing in October. These attacks aren't just acts of terrorism, but allow the group to continue taxation in areas it no longer controls. As one expert put it, quote, al-Shabaab is believed to be morphing into a group devoting more of its energies to extortion than jihad. This research encountered multiple credible sources reporting that al-Shabaab not only taxes employed Somalis, including government civil servants and businesses, but targets them for attack if they fail to pay. Terrorist attacks on hotels and restaurants are believed to constitute a pattern driven by a lack of payment of extortion money to al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab also has a sophisticated media wing that quickly disputes government reports, fans the flames of resentment against AMISOM, and produces films aimed at attracting foreign fighters, especially ethnic Somalis from other East African countries. In short, al-Shabaab is capable of almost every function an insurgency could ask for beyond holding territory. They can launch successful attacks on military and civilian targets throughout the country, which emphasizes the inability of the federal government to act as a source of protection. They can extort revenue, and they have substantial recruitment opportunities from downtrodden or disillusioned clans, or Somalis that view the foreign interests represented in AMISOM as the true enemy. All of this suggests that the fight will not be won anytime soon, a troubling reality given that several of AMISOM's troop-contributing countries are looking to remove forces sooner rather than later. These facts are not lost on the international community, which is why they have put special emphasis on creating a security architecture which will combine federal troops with those of the various regional administrations. The question of what the regional administrations are and why they have their own armies ties into the political situation, which adds another layer of dysfunction to the already dire picture in Somalia. The most optimistic overview possible is that Somalia operates on a federal system, with a federal government located in Mogadishu and several member states that govern different areas. As some of these areas have only recently been stabilized enough to make governance possible, they are still regional interim administrations and not states. Sounds too functional? That's because it's not the full story. Here's some of what's really going on. Somalia is, on paper, divided under the control of 6 or 7 different states/regional administrations. Similar to the units of the army, each state is closely affiliated with a specific clan, and, like in the army, these clans don't get along smoothly, and conflicts over disputed boundaries are common. Let's briefly introduce the players and talk about the rival influences threatening their territory. First is the autonomous region of Somaliland, which declared independence from Somalia in 1991. The international community, however, refused to recognize it, and is thus considered a region in Somalia. It operates independently from the federal government and is considered the most stable of Somalia's regions, enjoying a government that has undisputed control over most of its own territory. Still, Somaliland is not free from rival influences. In the eastern region of Sul, some members of the Dhulbahante clan declared independence, leading to bloody fighting with the Somaliland army. Puntland, the neighboring state to the east, disputes its eastern border significantly. To the west, a small group from the Gadabursi clan has also declared independence from Somaliland and has taken up arms as part of the Sultan Wabar militia. As of the making of this video, the Dhulbahante clan is in talks with Somaliland government, which will hopefully ensure the bloody dispute is put to rest. Moving on, the situation in other states is even messier. Puntland, our next destination, lies to Somaliland's east. Puntland has existed for many years, since 1998, and wields some power within its own borders. However, unlike Somaliland, the security challenges that it faces are significant. Somaliland and Puntland dispute their shared border, many clans operate independently in the Bari region, Puntland can fall victim to al-Shabaab attacks, an al-Shabaab splinter group that pledged allegiance to ISIS is active in the north of the region and briefly occupied a coastal town, and the town of Galyako on the southern border has been a flashpoint for bloody conflicts with what is now the Galmudug Regional Administration. Galmudug lies even further into the turbulent south of the country and experiences frequent clan violence and al-Shabaab attacks. The moderate Islamic militia al-Sunnah wa Jama'ah, who helped fight al-Shabaab, continues to occupy its state capital Duhusamareeb and much other territory. The 3 remaining states are interim administrations, which are generally held to be clan-based institutions that project little resemblance of legitimate sources of state society. Additionally, they face maximal threats from al-Shabaab and severe clan violence, whether directly or through proxies in the state security forces. What's the takeaway from this chaos? Essentially, it's that all of the supposed states face resistance from within their own territory, and are often in conflict with each other, whether because of political boundaries or long-standing clan disputes. This makes states reluctant to cede power to the government, whether it means donating troops that they might have used against their personal adversaries, or sacrificing political autonomy that could be leveraged to gain favorable settlements with neighboring states. The standing of the federal government itself does not make the prospects any more appealing. To many Somalis, it appears another corrupt puppet regime from the same mold that has failed for the past 25 years. Corruption plays a large part in many of Somalia's problems, so it's worth taking a second to understand why it has been so resilient there. To put it simply, corruption works like any crime. It requires means, motive, and opportunity. Specifically, the amount of corruption depends on the amount of money there is to be embezzled, the amount of motivation people have to steal from the government, and the capacity of the government to prevent people from taking it or to punish people when they do so. Much of Somalia's problem in this regard is that it has endured many years of conflict. This has contributed because it has left the government in an extremely fragile state with poor capacity to punish corrupt officials. At the same time, Somalia has become gorged with international aid intended to help with the reconstruction of the country, and given an expectation of expanding its influence into areas recently reclaimed from al-Shabaab, which means setting up new political structures in vulnerable areas that will have untested and probably worse oversight. And the money provided in the name of rebuilding the country will cease soon after the fighting has stopped, incentivizing people to make maximal use of opportunities for corruption while they have the chance. Exacerbating this is the entanglement of clan politics in Somali governance, which fractures the government and ensures different factions are continuously struggling for economic and political power, both of which can be acquired through corruption. Moreover, the allegiance to one's clan promotes nepotism, because Somalis are often expected to use personal gains for the advancements of their clan members by providing them with favorable benefits and positions. Also, many public checks of illegitimate government activity are lacking, such as journalistic free speech. Despite widespread use of radio stations for communication, the kind of free, independent public dialogue that might check corrupt practices is generally absent. In the south, al-Shabaab closes or takes over most of the radio stations, with regional leaders in other areas following suit. The government lacks any kind of special investigative body which might protect journalists, and under the regional administration, censorship runs rampant. As the UN Secretary General reports, in 2016, quote, 61 persons were arrested, including 35 protesting against a judicial decision in Puntland, and 13 were arrested for criticizing decisions made by officials on the Berbera port in Somaliland. 2 media workers were beaten by security forces in Galyako, and 1 human rights defender was charged with a criminal offense for collecting signatures demanding an end to police impunity. Corruption of this extent keeps the government from using its funding to provide beneficial services to the people, without which it is difficult to gain the legitimacy needed to exert influence on the regional administrations. At this point, things may seem bleak, but the situation is improving. What is being done to rectify these rifts? As of right now, I think the federal government's plan can best be understood as goodwill formation. The government is working to solidify the Somali constitution, which would be key in formalizing power-sharing agreements between the regional administrations and the central government. If this important step is to be made, the federal government will need the regional administrations to recognize the authority of the Constitution, and hence they need their goodwill. Fortunately, promising developments are being made in this regard. The new president, Abdullahi Mohamed Farmajo, is a popular figure across clan lines, and in the past few months, he has made symbolic visits to cities outside the capital. Moreover, he has called for talks with Somaliland, which, remember, claims complete independence. And the federal cabinet intends to hold meetings in the regional capitals, which is especially significant because the location of the capital in Hawiye clan-dominated Mogadishu has always been controversial and seen as a way of giving the clan power over the federal government. In more solid terms, the federal government and its member states recently ratified a security architecture, which means an agreement about the roles that federal and state troops will play in the conflict against al-Shabaab. In summary of the political situation, some attempts have been made to bridge the gaps within Somali society. However, these measures have many tests in their future if they want to succeed, and it's too early to tell if the situation will actually improve going forward. This brings us to the end of Part 2 of the series on Somalia. Part 3 will address the clan system and how it affects political development, as well as the historical perspectives that might shape the opinions of Somalis today. Thanks for watching this lucid briefing.